Most of us were never taught how to deal with conflict. Not at home, not at school, and definitely not at work. But what do you do when things keep bubbling under the surface? When you're biting your stress or dreading that one person who really just grinds your gears? But what if conflict could help create deeper relationships, better leadership, and more connected teams? Whether you're working the shop floor or sitting in the boardroom, tension shows up, and how we deal with it can either build trust or quietly break it. This is Healthy Conflict, the podcast where we stop treating conflict like a problem to avoid and start treating it like an opportunity for greater success. Because the best leaders, the ones people actually want to be with, aren't the ones who shut conflict down. They're the ones who get good at tough conversations. This isn't just about being a better communicator. It's about building cultures where people want to stay, grow, and give their best. I'm Rainey Martin, and I help entrepreneurs, leaders, and teams improve their bottom line by building workplaces that people love and customers never forget. I can be found at coachrainey.com.
Hi, Rennie, and I am Rasha Shaheen, and I help visionary founders and leaders step out of their daily firefighting and into their zone of genius by ultimately designing cultures that thrive without them. And I can be found on LinkedIn and look for Rasha Shaheen. So, Rainy, last week we were looking at conflict and we were looking at the topic of conflict or tension, tension being a signal, a
Right.
signal. And we've been talking about really tension being an opportunity, conflict kind of moving away from this idea that conflict is something bad or something to run away from or something to kind of be aggressive about. Today we're kind of wanting to explore a little bit about how do we deal with conflict before it gets to boiling point. How do we um, yeah, see those invisible signs of pressure and minimize the buildup. And
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
what are
Because,
your thoughts around that?
yeah, I think one thing that's sort of um, I don't know if a myth is the right word, but this concept that many people have, and especially some leaders, is that if they just ignore conflict, it'll work itself out, right? It'll go away.
Yeah.
Um, and the reality is that that's not what happens, right? It mutates and it starts showing up in sort of low level toxic ways like um, eye rolls or silent treatment or gossiping and back channeling or passive aggressive jokes. Um, yeah, even things you wouldn't think about, like overworking to prove worth or micromanaging, right? So that kind of tension that starts eating away at cultures can show up in ways that start becoming really damaging to a culture. And when something's damaging to a culture, it erodes high performance, and that's the at the end of the day, aside from of course all the feel good stuff, right? Aside from wanting everyone, our employees, people, humans to be in a good place and be growing and feeling positive about life and
Yeah.
themselves, we also just want high performing teams and
I mean,
individuals to help the
but
bottom line.
what we're saying though as well is like, we want the two, but actually by focusing on joy and kind of like, feeling good, and that actually gets high performance.
Exactly.
So it's not one or the other, it's both. And yes, and the one that really, when you said overworking to prove worth, oh my goodness, that's the one that really, like, I see a lot. And this idea of not wanting to, I've got like a few ideas. We've all been in work culture environments, and there are so many examples there that I see where like leaders, especially like the one that I have is middle management, example of like we're not wanting to kind of address or face the signals, just thinking yes it will just pan out. um Yeah,
Yeah.
all really, really touches a nerve, you know?
Right. Right. I think I might have shared with you at one point that I had a situation like this um, years ago at one of the companies that I was with, where I was a leader, um, and and that this started happening. This kind of negative toxicity, but it was like this low level murmur, right? Of course, because I was a leader, it was a murmur.
Mm.
It probably wasn't. It was probably pretty loud in the rooms that I wasn't in, but I could feel. And part of the way I felt it was these types of kind of resistance and negativity in meetings, one-on-one and team meetings, and just this general kind of unpleasant pleasant energy going on. And it was incredibly challenging, even though kind of what we're saying is that these are just the early indicators, right?
Yeah.
Later, if it goes unchecked, it turns into quitting. It turns into explosions. It turns into things that can be really, really damaging to a company, right? Not just the culture, but the company itself. So these are kind of the warning signs. But still, even in this early stage, it can be really, really challenging for a leader to handle and to address.
So can I ask you, like, what did you experience? How did you kind of like explore this? What did you witness? What happened?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So what happened was we actually had brought on a new employee, and it wasn't a great hire, and she I guess she ended up being getting unhappy very fast, but not really sharing her concerns or her issues with her direct supervisor or leadership or HR, um, but yes, sharing them with her coworkers, and also kind of finding little pieces that they were unhappy with and capitalizing on them and emphasizing them and talking to them about them consistently. And I heard about this sometimes in the moment, because I did have good relationships with a couple of the employees and a couple of the other employees that were having these experiences that, even though they were engaging in, they still were challenging even for them, because they were moving from being in a happy satisfied place to being in a place of disquiet about the company. And I don't know if it would necessarily have happened if she wasn't kind of fomenting this unhappiness. But it might have, that's part of kind of, I think, what you and I want to talk about is that what was my role? What was the leader's role in those situations to try to diffuse, address, understand, I don't- validate, where it's appropriate. How does a leader handle this kind of situation effectively? It was very challenging, and I know I would say that in most of the companies I've worked for as a leader or as an employee, I've been in this situation, right?
Mm.
These it's these kind of things happen in waves at companies where that something happens and people start feeling unhappy, and instead of maybe bringing that unhappiness to their leadership, or maybe they do and they don't get the response they want, it starts being this whispering, murmuring, gossiping, low level resentment, unhappy culture. And so, yes, what are some steps that I could have taken, that that leaders in general can be taking in these situations to diffuse?
Yeah. And what happened in the end to this person? Did they change or did they leave? Because those are the two options, aren't they?
Right, right. Um, and I would be careful, like, sort of like with the word change. I mean, it's true. it would be changing. But I guess the maybe I would qualify it by saying, um, did they get to a better place or a
Yeah.
different place, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so she did not. um, she was with the company for a good, I think, 8 months, and
Mm,
really, um, in the time that she was there, I would say most of the employees ended up very, very unhappy, and the environment was really unhealthy and challenging to be in.
mm,
Um, I think we made some progress kind of
mm,
later, maybe a couple months before she left, at
mm.
trying to kind of turn the ship. But in the end, uh, she was terminated for
Yeah.
cause.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
in Montana, so we have
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think there is also validity to the idea of coaching up or coaching out, right? And they even
Absolutely. Absolutely, because it's kind of like, I guess, we're not saying that by ultimately we're talking about listening to the signal. And when you listen to the signal, it doesn't mean that you're going to change personalities. It means that you're going to catch it quicker. And it doesn't mean that it would have prevented her from leaving. It might have meant that she left earlier or something, and creating less damage within the culture. So it doesn't necessarily, I guess, what I'm you know we don't, as humans, we don't have that power to kind of change people, but we need to look after the culture as best as possible.
yes, yes, I think that's a great point. That as leaders, it's part of our responsibility
Yeah.
to nurture a great culture, and to
a
head toxicity off at the pass, right?
100%, 100%, because it only takes one bad apple.
Mm,
Energy is contagious, calmness is contagious, negativity is contagious.
absolutely, that's absolutely true. At the same time, I want to be careful, like sort of attributing um all of it to her, right? I mean, if it, it's certainly likely that there were there were issues. I mean, if there weren't, then she wouldn't have been able to find purchase, right, on things that she was magnifying and attacking. So I think any leader in a situation like this, the first thing they need to be doing is kind of a self audit, right?
Yes.
What what could be happening, and what could you be contributing to that would be causing
Yeah.
unhappiness
Yeah.
or reasons for grievance, right? That's the first thing. Take ownership, take responsibility, and try to be self-aware and accountable, right?
And are you saying then that there probably, like, there was reason for her, or there could have been reason for her to be unsettled, so to speak, but she didn't feel like she had the opportunity to speak it directly, and what she was doing was it was coming out through the culture.
I think exactly, like I mean, I don't know what went on in her head
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
I had some conversations with her, but I also not sure how open and honest she felt she could be with me. But um my guess is that she either chose not to bring it to me or another leader, um and for whatever reason,
Mm,
or felt like she couldn't, because for think who knows, but as
yeah.
I would assume, her concerns about how we would react, or she felt like she did bring it to us and it was dismissed or not taken seriously enough. I don't know, but I think those are certainly um, things that happen where employees feel like, well, I tried to tell them, or I tried to bring it up, and I was ignored, or nobody cared, or right.
So so how do we kind of resolve that then? Because like, yeah, passive aggressive and gossip and all these kind of other survival responses are unmet needs for safety, respect, and clarity.
Oh, right,
So
exactly.
there's the leader's responsibility, like, it is a two-way conversation. Obviously we can't control the other person's responsibility, and we hope that they have the courage to bring things up in the right way. But to be a good leader, we can play our part in creating that safe space.
Right. We have to. Right.
But I'm kind of biased. I know you. I'd like to think that you do create those safe spaces. So I want to know, what lessons do you think you learned from that situation? We're constantly growing, we're constantly learning. It's never ending. But in that particular example, what was your takeaway?
Wow, that's a great question. Um, yeah, I think I mean I don't know if it was just my takeaway or my feeling the whole time really was this tremendous sense of responsibility. Um and and a constant sort of focus on what was I doing wrong, and how was I causing this situation to happen, and why wasn't I finding ways to to heal it or fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is it's very, very difficult for the leader involved because it's a constant questioning of your competence and abilities. So it's very challenging. I know when you asked me what was your takeaway, you're really looking for like what's the lesson and what's the lesson we
Yeah.
could learn, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Exactly that.
unfortunately, I still I'm still very human, and I still feel like I didn't I never did get it right, and if it happens again, what will I do? How will
Yeah.
I handle it as a
Yeah,
leader? Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I
Is
mean,
it
obviously I think about the tools I have now, right?
exactly? You've
Like
got tools now. We've got
mhm.
sayings now. And what is it from the tools that you have now that you didn't have then?
Right, right, right. And like, as we are wont to do, harkening back to positive intelligence, right? And
Mhm.
PQing it up
Yeah.
getting into sage space, right? And
Mhm.
and just for listeners who are not familiar with PQ, what that sounds like in regular terms is just getting in touch with your higher self, right? Maybe doing a meditation or deep breathing or a breathing exercise or taking a walk or singing a song, right? Doing things that that are calming and centering and focusing and take you to that place where wisdom lives.
Beautiful. I love that. And kind of just, like what I also take from that is just kind of recognizing your deeper intentions, because we don't have all the answers. We're not able to kind of predict the future. But if we ground ourselves and kind of recognize our intentions, then really you can't do more than that.
Yeah, and I think also sort of being really really clear on the outcome that you're looking for, right? And rather than I think it's easy to get defensive and angry and sort of hone in on, well, they should, you know, feel bad or feeling really resentful about the situation that you're in, and just getting into this really negative space that ends up being, again, PQ language, saboteur
Yeah.
to saboteur, um, rather than being in a space where you're looking for the win-win,
Yeah.
right? Where you're looking for everyone to come out of the situation in a more productive space, right?
Yeah.
So I think staying in touch with that, getting into your sage place, staying in touch with what does a win-win look like, where you're stepping into the other person's shoes. You care, you're leading with empathy, right? You
Yeah.
care where they're coming from, and you're going to come across that way because you really honestly authentically do care where they're coming
Yeah.
from.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, it goes back to kind of trying to build trust. I think empathy comes part of that, in the conversation, allowing for kind of honest conversation to come. I think, what you said in terms of um, having clarity in terms of what you want to get out of the conversation,
Right, right.
and, you know, having courage to kind of
Yes.
have the conversation. Because as we said before, a lot of leaders, not all leaders, like, I think it might be 50-50. Some go in with kind of like have avoidance tendencies, and some go in with kind of like aggressive tendencies. But having the courage to just um, have the conversation, and curiosity, not really kind of, you have your clarity, but curiosity, being open to um, what happens in the conversation, so you don't just bulldozer the agenda.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Like even if the idea of looking for the win-win isn't that you have the idea of what a win-win looks like, right? It's that
Yes.
you're exploring it together.
Yeah.
Um, but that's your overall goal isn't a specific win-win, it's a win-win in
Yeah.
general, right? That
Yeah.
everyone's walking away in
Yeah.
a productive space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're yeah, we've talked about kind of the importance of capturing things before they get to a boiling point. And it's kind of like, how do you spot it? And you talked about this, like when you're a leader, you don't see all that happens when you're not in the rooms, like you don't get to see it. So how do you think like you kind of have to be on even more like hyper alertness to kind of check for these things.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it definitely takes a sensitivity to the energy of your team, right? But I think, I mean, when you work closely with the team, you're gonna pick up on this kind of, when people are starting. I mean, yeah, it can be very subtle, like we talked about, just eye rolls and silence when you're asking a question or when you're asking for input. It's little, it can be little indicators, but if
Mhm.
if you're self-aware and you're paying attention, and you know your team, you're going to know when
Yeah.
that's happening, right?
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and and what are some things you could do early? What could I have done early to kind of
Yeah.
circumvent it,
Yeah,
right?
beautiful question. I think that is a really beautiful question. And for me, it's all about building trust.
Right,
You
right.
know, it's all
Psychological
about,
safety.
pardon?
Psychological safety.
Psychological safety, yeah, absolutely. Building, yeah, so that there's a real trust connection between people. And I'm sure there are, so many different ways of doing that, but just in the meeting, like in meetings, kind of like a 1 or 2 minute kind of like check in on like how everyone's actually doing, everyone giving a number, and you actually wanting to listen, like it needs to be authentic. Or that's a small idea. Like I know, like I'm thinking of my sister. She creates so many outings and events for people to meet up after work. Like so that it's not work, and there's a culture that's built there. What are some ideas that you can think of to like? So this is even pre now, like even you know
You're thinking
before the signs.
before you even see anything happening. Is that what
Yeah,
you mean?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean that's like I think that was I think that was the question you asked. But you're right. There's before, and there's also when you see it. When you see it, I think there's a slightly different answer when you see subtle.
Yeah, I think so too, because by the time that's going on, if you're starting to do, sort of a personal check-in or some kind of check-in at the beginning of meetings,
Yeah,
that's when they're not responding, right? They don't want to share. They've gotten into a
yeah.
place where they don't feel comfortable sharing. They don't have that safety, right? But
It's
before,
creating, so yeah, like before, well, yeah, but so let's talk about what happens when you pick up those subtle signals. And there's something around well, again, just addressing it,
yeah,
it doesn't have to be in the whole room, it doesn't have to be in front of everyone. You can talk to different people, kind of create small safe spaces for honest conversations.
that's really tricky because you don't want to. you don't want to triangulate, right? You don't want to create a situation where people feel like they're talking about other people and you're encouraging that, or
I think
it's
it depends
tricky.
on what you say and how you say. You don't have to name names. You can do check-ins.
Hmm.
How are you? What's going on?
Hmm.
Real questions with real listening.
Hmm. Again, I think part of what happens by then is that people don't feel free to share what, how they're doing, how they're really doing, right? You get
Well,
answers like, okay, everything's fine.
but that's it. I think that, like, if you ask again, or if you ask it again, or if you ask it the next day, or if you have a coffee with someone, if you're kind of feeling that there's a niggling thing, if you didn't notice, then okay, you'd let it go. But if you think that there really is something, you go, come on, let's have a coffee. I'd love to kind of check up on you. It has to be real. It can't be kind of like tick boxy.
Yeah, and
But
maybe
it's really
even
putting that time in. Time is like,
right.
yeah,
And maybe when they say, everything's fine, you respond by saying, I've noticed that you
yeah,
you actually seem like you're having a hard time, or
yeah,
that things aren't feeling that great for you, and I'd love
yeah,
to hear what's going
yeah,
on. I really want to know. I
yeah,
want to be able to help address it, and maybe,
yeah,
if there's anything I can do to help
yeah,
shift things for you, I want to make that happen.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. I think addressing it is critical. Is critical, and
yeah,
coming from a place of authenticity and caring. Again, I
yeah.
mean, leading with empathy is critical, right?
And here's another one, but like I want to kind of unpack this even more. And I don't know if we have time today, but how do you normalize tension?
Oh, wow.
Because
Yeah.
that's another kind of angle where, like, and it goes back to conflict being an opportunity. We don't want to be scared of it. It's actually the place where we get to be innovative, and trust is definitely the glue behind all of this. If you really know that someone cares, you're not going to take any conversation as personal. It's just about the work. So I do think that all this stuff about creating culture, creating trust, it's so important. And once you've got that foundation, normalizing tension. But that's the next that's kind of like next step, next level, next layer.
Right, but brilliant, brilliant. How do you normalize tension? I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. Yes,
Maybe
because
we'll
you're right.
explore that next time.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Because I think you're absolutely right that that's a space
Yeah.
where if you can make room for it, if it can exist within psychological safety, it
Yeah.
can be a space for really powerful growth.
Yes. I mean, I think that's when a business really kind of like thrives then.
Right. 10
So
X's. Yeah.
so Rainey, what do you think, you know, what is our takeaway from today? What were we kind of like just remind ourselves from what we discussed today?
Mm, mm, yeah. Um, yeah. So yeah, tension ignored
Yeah.
can become tension weaponized, right?
100.
But tension handled can become trust earned, right?
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. I
And
love it. I think
maybe
that's it.
maybe we ask our listeners to think about for themselves, right? Where in your work or life are you seeing signs of a boiling point, or what's one conversation that you've been avoiding that could release some pressure?
Love it.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brilliant. So really, like, conflict doesn't mean that something is going wrong. It means that something matters. And when you learn how to handle it, everyone wins: your team, your
Yeah.
business, and your own well being. So, yeah, thank you very much for this awesome conversation. Um, yeah, this is where real leadership begins. So, see you next time. I'm Rasha Shaheen, and you can find me on LinkedIn, Rasha Shaheen. And where can we find you, Rainey?
Yep, I'm Rainey Martin, and I can be found at coachrainey.com.